The church bells rang at exactly 6 p.m., just like they had every Sunday for the past 40 years. But this Sunday was different. This Sunday, Auntie Mae stood up in the middle of Pastor Johnson's sermon, her worn hands gripping the pew in front of her, and said 3 words that made the entire congregation go silent. I saw everything. If you're watching this, please subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Because what happened next in that small church in South Carolina changed not just one life, but an entire community's understanding of truth, sacrifice, and the weight of silence. My name is Clara, and Auntie Mae raised me after my mama passed when I was 7. Everyone in our neighborhood knew Auntie Mae. She was the woman who made sweet potato pie for every funeral, who sat on her porch every evening humming old spirituals, who never missed a Sunday service. Her house smelled like lavender and old books, and her voice could calm a crying baby or silence a room full of arguing men. But there was something about Auntie Mae that nobody talked about, a heaviness in her eyes, a way she'd stop mid-sentence sometimes, like she was listening to a voice only she could hear. And every year, on June 15th, she'd sit in her bedroom with the door closed, and we knew not to disturb her. I was 32 years old that Sunday when she finally spoke. 32 years of living in her house, of watching her carry something so heavy it bent her shoulders, of wondering what could make such a strong woman look so broken on that one day every June. The sanctuary was packed that morning. Pastor Johnson was preaching about forgiveness, about letting go of the past, about how holding on to pain only poisons your own soul. His voice rose and fell with that rhythm that makes you feel like the words are coming straight from heaven. Somebody in here, he called out, his hand raised high. Somebody in here is carrying a burden that ain't yours to carry. Somebody in here has been holding a secret so long it's become part of your bones. But God is saying today, it's time to let it go. That's when Auntie Mae stood up. The wooden pew creaked under her weight as she rose. She was wearing her Sunday best, a purple dress with white lace at the collar, the one she saved for special occasions. Her gray hair was pulled back in her usual neat bun, and her reading glasses hung on a chain around her neck. She looked like she always did, dignified, composed, but her hands were shaking. "Pastor," she said, and her voice cut through the humid air like a knife through butter. "Pastor, I need to say something." The entire church went still. Even the babies stopped fussing, because Auntie Mae, in all the years I'd known her, had never interrupted a sermon, never raised her voice in church except to sing, never called attention to herself. Pastor Johnson stopped mid-sentence, his hand still raised in the air. "Sister Mae, are you all right?" "No, Pastor," she said, and her voice cracked just a little. "No, I'm not all right. Haven't been all right for 40 years, but I'm about to be." She turned to face the congregation, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Not peace exactly, but something close to it. Like a woman who'd been holding her breath underwater for decades and was finally about to break the surface. "Y'all know me," she began, and her voice was steady now, strong. "Known me all my life. Some of you watched me grow up in this very church. Watch me marry my Henry. God rest his soul. Watch me bury him too young. Watch me raise Clara when her mama passed. Y'all know me." People nodded. Someone said, "Amen." But there's something y'all don't know. Something nobody knows except me and God and one other person who's been dead for 40 years now. The air in the church felt electric. You could have heard a pin drop. June 15th, 1983, she said, and her voice got quieter, like she was pulling the words up from somewhere deep. That was the night everything changed. That was the night I saw what I saw. That was the night I made a choice that's haunted me every single day since. I gripped the edge of my pew. June 15th, the day she always locked herself in her room, the day she never explained. I was 31 years old, Auntie Mae continued. Henry had been gone 2 years. I was working nights at the hospital, cleaning floors and changing sheets. Money was tight. Times were hard, but I had my faith, and I had this community, and I thought that was enough. She paused, and for a moment I thought she might sit back down. But then she took a deep breath and kept going. That night, I finished my shift at 11 p.m. It was hot. Lord, it was hot, and I decided to walk home instead of waiting for the bus. Needed to clear my head. So I walked down Oak Street, past the old Miller house, past the park where the children play. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong, like someone crying, but not regular crying, the kind of crying that comes from deep in your soul. The church was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. I followed that sound, Auntie Mae said, and it led me to the alley behind the pharmacy. And there, her voice broke. She closed her eyes, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. There, I saw Miss Caroline Johnson. A gasp went through the church. Caroline Johnson had been the mayor's wife. She died in 1983. Everyone knew that. Car accident, they said. Tragic. She was on the ground, Auntie Mae whispered. Bleeding, her dress was torn, and standing over her, she opened her eyes and looked directly at someone in the third row. Standing over her was her own husband, the mayor, Mr. James Johnson himself. The church erupted, people shouting, standing up, Pastor Johnson calling for order. But Auntie Mae just stood there, tears streaming down her face, finally unburdening herself of a truth that had been crushing her for 4 decades. But here's what nobody expected. Here's the part that changed everything. He saw me, Auntie Mae said, when the church finally quieted down. Mr. Johnson saw me standing there, and you know what he did? He smiled. Smiled like we were old friends, meeting at the grocery store, and he said, Mae, you're a good woman, a God-fearing woman. You know what happens to good women who can't keep their mouths shut? I felt sick to my stomach. The mayor had been dead for 20 years, but his son was sitting in that third row. His son, Marcus Johnson, who is now a judge. His son, who was looking at Auntie Mae with a face as white as a sheet. He told me if I ever spoke a word, Auntie Mae continued, he'd make sure I lost everything. My job, my home. He said, accidents happen to people who talk too much. Said Caroline herself would suffer even more if I didn't walk away right then and there. So I walked away. Her voice broke completely now. God forgive me. I walked away. I left that poor woman bleeding in an alley, and I walked away because I was scared, because I was a black woman in 1983 with no husband, no money, no protection, because I knew what happened to people like me when we went up against people like him. The silence in the church was deafening. Caroline Johnson died that night, Auntie Mae said. They said it was a car accident, said she lost control on Highway 52. But I knew, God help me, I knew. And I stayed silent because I was afraid, because I was a coward, because I chose my own safety over another woman's life. Pastor Johnson had tears running down his face. Half the congregation was crying, and Judge Marcus Johnson, he just sat there, frozen, staring at the woman who just destroyed his family's legacy with nothing but the truth. But Auntie Mae wasn't done. "I'm telling you this now," she said, "because I'm 71 years old, and I don't have much time left. The cancer came back, and the doctors say I got maybe 6 months, and I'll be damned if I meet my Maker with this on my soul. I'll be damned if I let another day go by without speaking Caroline Johnson's name and telling the world what really happened to her." She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out an envelope, an old yellowed envelope that looked like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. "This here," she said, holding it up, "is a letter Caroline Johnson gave me 3 weeks before she died. She came to my house one night, bruised and scared, and she gave me this letter. Said if anything ever happened to her, I should open it. Said it would prove what her husband was doing to her." "I never opened it," Auntie Mae whispered. "I was too afraid, but I kept it. All these years, I kept it. And now," she looked directly at Judge Johnson, "now it's time for the truth to come out. All of it." The judge stood up, his face red with rage or shame, or maybe both. "You're lying," he said, but his voice shook. "My father was a good man, a respected man. You're just a bitter old woman trying to—" "Your father," Auntie Mae interrupted, and her voice was steel now, "was a monster who beat his wife until she bled, who threatened witnesses, who covered up a murder and called it an accident. And you, Judge Johnson, you lived in that house. You saw the bruises. You heard the screams. Don't you dare stand there and call me a liar when you know in your heart I'm telling the truth." Judge Johnson's face crumpled, just collapsed in on itself, like a building falling down. Because she was right. Everyone could see it in his eyes. She was right, and he'd always known. "I'm sorry," Auntie Mae said, but she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking up, like she was talking to someone none of us could see. "I'm sorry, Caroline. I'm sorry I didn't save you. I'm sorry I stayed quiet for 40 years while your name got dragged through the mud and your death got turned into a lie. But I'm not quiet anymore. Not today. Not ever again." She sat down then, suddenly, like all the strength had gone out of her legs. I rushed to her side, and she gripped my hand so tight it hurt. "It's done," she whispered. "It's finally done." Pastor Johnson cleared his throat, tears still streaming down his face. "Church," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Church, I think we need to take a moment to pray. For Sister Mae, for Caroline Johnson's soul, for the truth, for justice, even when it comes 40 years too late." But before anyone could bow their heads, Judge Johnson spoke up. His voice was different now, smaller, broken. "She's telling the truth," he said. My father was not the man everyone thought he was. I was 12 years old when my mother died. I remember that night. I remember him coming home late, blood on his shirt, panic in his eyes. I remember him burning his clothes in the backyard. I remember. He broke down completely then, sobbing like a child. I remember everything, and I've spent my whole life trying to forget, trying to pretend it didn't happen, building a career on my father's name, living in his shadow, becoming a judge, like I could somehow make up for what he did. But I can't. I can't make up for it, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. The church erupted again. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't shock or anger. It was something like relief, like a wound that had been festering for 40 years was finally being cleaned out. Auntie Mae looked at Judge Johnson, and I saw something pass between them. Not forgiveness exactly. Some things are too big for that, but understanding, recognition. Two people who'd been carrying the same burden, just on different shoulders. The letter, someone called out. What's in the letter? Auntie Mae looked at the envelope in her hands, then at Pastor Johnson. Pastor, would you read it? I don't think I can. Pastor Johnson took the letter with reverent hands, like it was something holy. He opened it carefully, and I could see his eyes scanning the yellowed paper. His face went through a dozen emotions in the span of seconds. Dear May, he began reading, and his voice cracked on every word. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It means James finally did what he's been threatening to do for years. I'm writing this because I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to tell my story when I can't tell it myself. I married James when I was 18 years old. I thought I was the luckiest girl in South Carolina. He was handsome, ambitious, came from a good family. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, but perfection is just another word for a beautiful lie. The first time he hit me was on our honeymoon. I'd said something he didn't like. I don't even remember what, and he backhanded me so hard I saw stars. Then he cried, apologized, swore it would never happen again. I believed him. It happened again 2 weeks later, and again, and again. Until I stopped counting, until the bruises became as much a part of me as my own skin. Pastor Johnson had to stop reading. He was crying too hard to continue. Someone else, Sister Margaret from the choir, came up and took the letter from him. I've tried to leave, Sister Margaret read, her voice shaking. I've tried 6 times, but James always finds me, always brings me back, always reminds me what will happen if I try again. He's the mayor now, powerful, connected. Everyone loves him. Who would believe me if I told them? Who would choose me over him? So, I'm writing this letter to you, May, because you're the only person who's ever looked at me like I was human, like I was worth something. I'm writing this because I know my time is running out. I can feel it. James has been drinking more, raging more. Last night, he told me he was tired of me, tired of my tears, tired of pretending. If something happens to me, please tell people the truth. Tell them I didn't die in some tragic accident. Tell them I was murdered by the man who swore to love me. Tell them Caroline Johnson was worth more than her husband's reputation. Tell them I existed. Tell them I mattered. Tell them I was here. With love and desperate hope, Caroline. The silence after Sister Margaret finished reading was absolute, sacred, the kind of silence that falls when truth walks into a room and refuses to leave. Auntie Mae was weeping openly now, 40 years of grief and guilt and shame pouring out of her all at once. I held her while she shook, while she repeated, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, over and over, like a prayer. Judge Johnson walked up to the front of the church, walked right up to Auntie Mae, and got down on his knees in front of her. Thank you, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Thank you for finally telling the truth. Thank you for keeping my mother's letter safe all these years. Thank you for having the courage I never had. He pulled something out of his jacket pocket, a small journal, leather-bound and worn. This is my mother's diary, he said. I found it years ago, hidden in the attic. It has everything, every beating, every threat, every time she tried to leave and he stopped her. I kept it hidden because I was ashamed, because I didn't want the world to know what my father really was. But Auntie Mae is right. The truth matters more than reputation. Justice, matters more than comfort. He handed the diary to Pastor Johnson. I want this turned over to the police. I want them to reopen my mother's case. I want the world to know who my father really was and who my mother really was too. She deserves that. She deserves to be remembered as more than just a tragic accident. What happened next was like a dam breaking. Person after person stood up in that church and confessed their own secrets. Mrs. Henderson admitted she'd seen the mayor hitting Caroline through a window once and been too afraid to report it. Mr. Davis said he'd found Caroline's broken glasses behind the pharmacy the day after she died, but threw them away because he didn't want to get involved. Sister Ruth revealed that Caroline had come to her for help 2 weeks before she died, and Ruth had turned her away because she was afraid of what the mayor might do. For 3 hours, that church became a confession booth, a courtroom, a place where truth finally had a voice after 40 years of silence. When it was over, when the last person had spoken and the last tear had been shed, Pastor Johnson stood up and said something I'll never forget. Church, he said, today we witnessed something powerful. Today we saw what happens when one person decides that truth matters more than fear, when one woman decides that justice, even delayed, is still worth fighting for. Sister Mae, you carried a burden that wasn't yours to carry. Caroline Johnson's death wasn't your fault. Her husband's evil wasn't your responsibility. But your courage today, your willingness to finally speak up, that's going to change things. That's going to make sure other women like Caroline get heard before it's too late. Auntie Mae looked up at him, and for the first time in 40 years, I saw something like peace in her eyes. The next few weeks were chaos. The police reopened Caroline Johnson's case as a homicide investigation. Judge Marcus Johnson voluntarily stepped down from the bench and cooperated fully with the authorities, turning over his mother's diary and providing testimony about what he'd witnessed as a child. The mayor's carefully constructed legacy crumbled in a matter of days. But more importantly, something shifted in our community. Women started coming forward, not just about Caroline Johnson, but about their own stories of abuse, of silence, of secrets kept too long. A support group formed at the church. Hotlines were established. Laws were changed. Caroline Johnson's death, 40 years later, was finally saving lives. Auntie Mae's health declined rapidly after that Sunday. The cancer moved fast, just like the doctors said it would. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She'd done what she needed to do. She'd spoken truth to power. She'd honored Caroline Johnson's memory. I was with her the night she died, holding her hand in the same bedroom where she'd locked herself away every June 15th for 40 years. Clara, she whispered, her voice barely audible, you know what I learned? What, Auntie? Silence protects the wrong people. Truth might hurt, might cost you everything, might come too late. But it's the only thing that sets you free, the only thing that lets you meet God with a clear conscience. She squeezed my hand. Don't ever stay quiet when you see something wrong, baby. Don't ever let fear make you small. You hear me? I hear you, Auntie. Good, that's good. She smiled then, and it was the most peaceful smile I'd ever seen on her face. I can rest now. I can finally rest. She died 3 hours later with me and Pastor Johnson and half the church crowded into that little bedroom, singing Amazing Grace while she slipped away. At her funeral, Judge Johnson stood up to speak. He talked about courage, about redemption, about how one woman's willingness to break her silence had freed not just Caroline Johnson's memory, but an entire community from the weight of hidden truths. My mother and Sister Mae never met, he said, but they were connected by something stronger than friendship. They were connected by truth, by the belief that women's lives matter, that women's voices matter. That silence in the face of evil is its own kind of sin. He paused, looking at Auntie Mae's casket. Thank you, Sister Mae. Thank you for being braver than I was. Thank you for loving my mother enough to finally tell her story. Rest well. You've earned it. They buried Auntie Mae on a Tuesday afternoon in the church cemetery, right next to Henry. Pastor Johnson said the most beautiful words about how God honors truth tellers, how heaven has a special place for those who stand up for the voiceless, even when it costs them everything. As they lowered her casket into the ground, a butterfly landed on the flowers, a monarch, orange and black, impossibly beautiful. It stayed there through the entire service, through every prayer and hymn and tear. And when we finally walked away, it flew straight up into the sky, higher and higher, until we couldn't see it anymore. Sister Ruth said it was a sign that Auntie Mae was free, that Caroline Johnson was free, that truth, finally spoken, had given them both wings. I think she was right. Today, there's a bench in the park with a plaque that reads, "In memory of Caroline Johnson and Mae Williams, two women who taught us that silence protects the wrong people, and truth, no matter how late, is always worth fighting for." And every year on June 15th, I sit on that bench and think about Auntie Mae, about the weight she carried for 40 years, about the courage it took to finally speak, about how one Sunday morning, one elderly black woman stood up in church and changed everything with 3 simple words. I saw everything. So let me ask you something, wherever you are right now, watching this story unfold. What are you staying silent about? What truth are you carrying that's too heavy for one person to bear? What would happen if you had the courage to speak up? Because here's what Auntie Mae taught me. Silence might feel safer, might seem easier, might protect you in the short term. But in the long run, silence only protects the people who deserve it least. And truth, real, hard, uncomfortable truth, is the only thing that sets anyone free. Auntie Mae was 71 years old when she finally spoke. She was sick, dying, had nothing left to lose. But you know what? That Sunday morning, when she stood up in church, she wasn't a dying old woman. She was a warrior, a truth teller, a woman who decided that justice mattered more than reputation, that Caroline Johnson's memory mattered more than her own comfort, that 40 years of silence was 40 years too long. And if she could do that, if she could carry that weight for 4 decades and still find the strength to speak, then maybe we all can. So I'm asking you again, what are you staying silent about? Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for you to be brave. Someone is waiting for you to speak up. Someone is waiting for the truth that only you can tell. Don't wait 40 years. Don't carry that weight until you're dying and desperate. Speak now. Speak loud. Speak truth. Because Auntie Mae taught me one last thing before she died. The only thing worse than the pain of speaking up is the regret of staying silent. Rest in power, Auntie Mae. Rest in power, Caroline Johnson. Your voices matter. Your truth matters. Your lives matter. And we'll never let anyone forget it. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of someone you know or something you've seen, do me a favor. Share it. Talk about it. Let Auntie Mae's courage ripple out into the world and inspire others to speak their truth, too. because that's how we honor the truth tellers. That's how we honor the women who came before us and carried burdens too heavy for one person to bear. We pick up where they left off. We speak when they couldn't. We fight when they were too tired. And we never, ever stay silent when silence protects the wrong people. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. Thank you for being here. And if you're carrying a truth that's too heavy to hold alone, I'm asking you now, put it down, speak it out loud, let the weight fall from your shoulders, because you deserve to be free, just like Auntie Mae, just like Caroline Johnson. You deserve to be free. Amen.